Well, I wanted to do a video um, about the planet, ecology, conversion. We're experiencing now what has been predicted for a long time, over 20 years, climate change, record heat here in South Florida. Uh, and of course, many phenomena around the world of flooding and sustained, rainfall over one area, heating up of oceans, droughts, fires, air pollution due to fires, etc. And so the whole issue of ecology, which is a wonderful word, actually, if you know any Greek, if you've ever even perused, I would say, the New Testament in Greek, you would find that the word oikos, which means house, is very common, or home, if you will, which is a word that Germanic word, heim, which is not really found, well, hogar, the hearth in Spanish and other languages, but in any case, ecology is like the study of the house in the sense of the world, really, an ecosystem or a community, even. Just as economy would be like the law, the nomos of the house. And we apply it, of course, to economic matters. But as Father Pope Francis has said in Laudato Si, the encyclical, which begins with the words in old, medieval Umbrian, the language of Saint Francis of Assisi, praised be you, Lord, etc., the canticle of creation or of the sun. We must care for our common home. And I remember a friend of mine who has very successful financially, as he is himself, relatives, devout Catholics, who poo-pooed some years ago, poo-pooed uh, Francis saying that the environment is the top or one of the top concerns we should have. The fact that they can, ridicule the Pope Francis that way, which is just part and parcel of a whole sort of right wing conservative pseudo traditionalistic attack on Pope Francis, is a sign of this blindness regarding the environment because it's so tied up with economic development and profits and drilling and all kinds of things, which are the real gods of a lot of people without their knowing it. They construct a God who empowers their projects rather than the real God. As I have said in so many videos, which I call it a form of magic, manipulation of the deity. And so if we ruin or irreversibly damage the planet, there's no plan B, as they say. This is our common home. And I wanted to discuss not so much scientific things, which are beyond my purview, my realm, but rather the theology of all this, getting into some biblical passages like Isaiah 11 and Hosea 4, and maybe some other passages, and talk about how is this related to the spiritual and Christian life and to the gospel and to everything. everything that could be that should be of importance to us, so that um, we just actually went to a parade uh, in South Florida where I grew up, and the heat was incredible. I mean, I haven't been there for some years. It was absolutely unbearable, even though in years past I attended that parade every year without any, you know, any other experience than the normal heat and humidity of Miami. But what's happening now is basically unbearable, unlivable. And thank God that the power company has probably adapted enough that we haven't had any power outages so far, generally. So that the scientists have been warning for years that our way of life and our industries and lack of environmental concerns and controls would were damaging the planet. You know, Al Gore had his famous movie that I have seen once or twice, whose title I forget because I have senior moments. And it was obvious to me back then on theological principles that you can't abuse the planet. You can't abuse anything. I am the kind of person that was raised to turn off lights, not to waste, not to treat any property as discardable easily. I use paper towels quite a bit. I don't want to get into other things that I hold on to more than most people would, from a tremendous concern to not waste and to be a steward, maybe a too meticulous steward. I will admit to that. But I remember being a professor in the seminary, the major seminary here in Boynton Beach. And I was talking to a couple of my colleagues, very learned, one in particular. Both were very learned, but this particular one taught both philosophy and theology, very, very well read in those fields. But he had bought into what at the time George W. Bush was promoting about downplaying climate change. And this downplay of climate change has been a very Republican thing for decades. And as I understand it, George W. Bush was redacting memos and things just to remove this bad news, you know, of climate change and human effect on the climate. And it goes back to that principle that it's one of my pet principles. The truth is not affected by what we want to believe. The ostrich with the head in the sand doesn't change reality. I had a baby brother who would close his eyes and think that I had disappeared. And so many people hold on to, especially with evil media types, false prophets. If you look at it biblically, these are the false prophets I have spoken about so many times. They were on the payroll of the king. In Jeremiah, in the book of Kings, 1 Kings 22, 400 prophets is the typical number on the payroll. They say whatever the king wants to hear. And this lone guy, Micah, is the party pooper, or Jeremiah lambasting the false prophets who have not been sent by God as he has been sent. And they prophesy peace. They prophesy good news, things that make you feel good, which are false. Just like Amos. Amos confronts the high priest in Bethel, the priest of Bethel, and they say, go earn your living in the south where you came from, Tekoa, because this is the royal sanctuary and temple. And Amos says, I'm not prophesying for money. I have two jobs. I'm a cow herder or sycamore tree pruner or something. But I have been called from behind the flock to announce the word of Yahweh. When he roars, who is not going to shake and listen? And so you have this constant biblical conflict between truth and falsehood. Jesus spoke the truth. He was crucified. He had hard words. People would leave in John chapter 6. So it's a very, very important topic that has to do with everything, beginning with the very notion of truth, which is so much under attack. Imagine if truth is what you artificially, with intelligence or something, create your own bubble where your fantasy and your dream, etc., is what you believe. Now, I think, Christians, real uh, believers and not knowers of the Judeo-Christian tradition realize that, in fact, something of a dream, a utopia, a place that doesn't exist, is presented in the Bible. The original creation was vegetarian. There was supposed to be no violence. I give you fruit and seeds to eat. And it is only, this is well known to those who study these things a little bit, that God lowers his standards in after the flood and just prohibits homicide, the killing of human beings. But now you can kill animals. You just can't kill human beings, and you can't drink or eat their blood. But the every image of the in the Bible is basically vegetarian, with the exception of fish, which I know that some of my strict vegan or vegetarian friends raise an eyebrow. In Ezekiel, you have an abundance of fish for eating, and in the New Testament, Jesus eats fish. There is mention of the preparation of the Passover in Mark and Matthew and Luke, I think. In John, there is no real Passover, Last Supper. Jesus is crucified before the official Passover, at the time that the lambs are being slaughtered. So you're going to be hard pressed to find meat eating passages in the Bible, although in the ancient tribal society, yes, Abel offered a holocaust and Cain was jealous because he offered grain. So it is more complicated, or is kind of complicated. But nevertheless, if you look at real eschatological passages of the end time when Messiah comes. For example, the great passage of Isaiah 11. Let me try to just bring that up. I had another one here. And now that this thing is acting up on me, I don't know why it does this now. But anyway, it's been doing this. My accordance is crashing. In any case, in Isaiah 11, which is this messianic prophecy of the forgot how this works. I don't want to. In Isaiah 11, which is the messianic prophecy of the root of David, or the stump of David, this is the famous passage of uh, the descendant of David, who has the Spirit of the Lord resting upon him, as Jesus did in his baptism, as the servant in Isaiah 42 is going to have the first of the four or five servant songs in second Isaiah. It's a spirit of wisdom, counsel, understanding, might, knowledge, fear of the Lord, etc. And then it says that righteousness and faithfulness, this emet, uh, truth, you could always also translate in verse 5, um, will be girding his loins, and then the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the shepherd shall lie down with the goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them, and they shall graze together. This is what I call the vegetarian lion passage. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, and vipers won't hurt the nursing child. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This knowledge of the Lord is an intimate relationship, true knowledge, true relationship with the Lord. It requires taking very seriously nonviolence, turning swords into plowshares. There may be a time, as in Joel, where plowshares are turned into swords, maybe to fight Hitler or something like that, but certainly not to invade Ukraine, which politically some people poo-poo too, not Pope Francis. He mentions La Martoriata Ucraina, tormented and tortured Ukraine in every Angelus on Sunday. So that the great passage in Isaiah 26, where there's a wonderful banquet with rich foods and choice wines, etc. I was looking at that. Is this fat, animal fat? And it isn't. I think it's Shem, and I think it's oil, like olive oil, or foods dipped in oil. So I think that's a very important point, because we know that meat eating, and I eat meat. I don't eat too very much meat, but I do eat some meat. We know that massive meat eating has an impact on the environment, but more important than that is the whole idea of nonviolence and the kind of spirit we should have. And it is a spirit of meekness and moderation. Nothing in excess is one of the Greek great maxims. So when you want to continually possess more and build more and make more money and spend more and make more and waste more and discard more, etc., you are addicted to material things, and your avarice is idolatry, says the letter to the Colossians, and you turn a deaf ear to scientific and other evidence regarding the effect of uncontrolled activity, imprudent desire to satisfy every possible bodily and visual and whatever other passion in the bad sense you want to name, without considering the effect on the common home. And many scientists and other social people tell us that the first to hear it or to feel it are the poor. I have friends who work in construction. I was in the parade under a tent for a few hours, 2 or 3 hours on Tuesday, 4th of July, and I couldn't stand it. You can imagine being on a roof 8 hours a day, besides the fact that floods and other horrible catastrophes, natural events have been taking place. And the call to conversion doesn't depend on some sort of scientific proof like a mathematical formula or something, or a logistic syllogism or something, that humans can affect the world and the environment. It should be based on that prior conviction, which I guess I didn't finish saying. My learned colleague in the seminary was buying George W. Bush's denials of human effect on climate change. And he had a degree in engineering undergraduate, then had gotten a philosophical theological doctorate from a very fine university. And my response was, I'm not going to argue science. I'm going to argue on a theological and moral point. You can't abuse the planet without inevitable consequences. Just like I know that waste not, want not was inculcated to me, or I picked it up by osmosis from my father or whatever, and I have fared rather well without making ever much money, and being able to enjoy things very well in a simple fashion. I did go to Rome, twice a year. I I got through with that because I right now these days I couldn't do those trips. I couldn't afford them. I couldn't do the walking, etc. I did probably use up a lot of jet fuel in those trips. I stayed with nuns. I stayed in very cheap lodgings. When I got my license in Rome, for 2 years I had no TV. I had a fan, I believe. In other words, I know what it's like to live simply, and you can get used to it. I think I have said I studied as a Descalced Carmelite in the Dominican Republic for 15 months, showering with a bucket and a scooper of water, whatever you call that. The water in a bucket was sufficient, once I got used to it very quickly, to have some left over before, after I had, rinsed myself completely. At first, I was freaked out. Already in Washington, D.C., when I was with the Dominicans, when they saw how I showered in the common shower, I mean, they were private. You didn't see people showering, but you could hear. They said, you do it the Spanish way. You turn off the water while you're soaping yourself. Americans, I think, in general, keep the water running the whole time. That to me was unheard of, being, raised for the first 8 years of my life almost in Cuba. We didn't waste water like that. In some places you have a water shortage. So I learned very early on. So this comes from deep inside. But if you read the Bible, you see the spirit of the true believer, both Jew and Christian, that nonviolence, even the Jewish diet, the kosher diet, allows eating of meek animals, not rapacious animals, the hawk or some other, the eagle or some other lions or something. You eat lambs and oxen and things like that as a concession which God made. But in the end time, you are going to have vegetarian lions. And so the conversion of spirit, a spirit of greater modesty and meekness, humility, and moderation, frugality, sharing, not wasting, not desiring, coveting more things, more possessions. That's the kind of conversion that I'm talking about from my reading of the Bible, the tradition of the church, philosophers, the magisterium of the church, and certainly today, Pope Francis. At night, I am rereading, probably for the third or maybe more times, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, and then I will reread again Laudato Si, on care for our common home. So when you think of this word oikos, home, you could also translate, well, the word is house, and then you can translate home, hearth, fireplace, family, gathered together, talking, sharing, wisdom, the elderly having a place with their wisdom, with their weakness, the young eager to learn and respecting years, community, koinonia, as Paul would say, this communion, fellowship, things in common. That is a utopia that we are called to have as our model, to aspire to. Acts of the Apostles famously says that they all shared everything. No one was in need. Whoever had properties would place them at the feet of the apostles. Oh, yeah, there was that exception, Ananias and Sapphira. And they lied to the Holy Spirit and to the apostles and kept something back and were struck dead. So the ideal picture that is painted allows for a smudge there to remind us that ideal utopias, if you will, are things to be careful with. We've had utopian movements, but that this should inform policy and voting and politics, the very demeanor of a president, the very social programs. I'm reading a history of Florida among my numerous excerpts that I read every morning. And right now I'm on the chapter The Great Depression. And Florida, for a while there, was saying back then, leave us alone, we want to do it alone, we have tourism, etc. When the Great Depression hit, they voted for Franklin Roosevelt. I've read now of 2 elections of Roosevelt with over 75% of the vote, or around 75% of the vote in Florida. And so you know that you need something like the government wisely administered, not wastefully. But let's be careful. The government, if you wanted to point out to where has the government wasted most money, my answer would be in military, in arms. There you have, $600. They used to have $600 toilet seats, contracts, military contracts. People think waste is when you allow, certain lazy people, and there are some, and many maybe, to live off of welfare. But that is not, you have to look at the statistics. That's exactly what's going on with that. I think fighting over $15 an hour wage is inhuman. Right now in South Florida, they say you have to make 100,000 plus a year. I've never come close, and I have a doctorate and a law degree from Harvard. I have never, and I practice law, and I have never come close to making $100,000 a year. That's what I would need to live in South Florida if I had not bought my place for $93,000 in the 2008 real estate bust. It's probably worth at least twice as much now. I don't want to move, but I couldn't afford to live here. I would then have to then move to Mexico or something with my Social Security and my little pension. But I know I was raised with a father that retired at age 40 and had a yacht custom built in New York, 42-foot wheeler. He was a champion fisherman of Cuba, marlin fisherman, all the records. I have all the pictures, all the newspaper articles. And his father had been a very wealthy doctor, medical doctor in Cuba. But his concern, a humble man, was not to run out of money, to leave us some money. He was a lot older than we were. He was 44 when I was born, and I was the eldest. So I learned these habits of frugality, some sort of God-fearing humility, modesty, non-avariciousness. My father could have actually used the cash he had sitting in the bank to buy lots on Key Biscayne, which would have made us all multi-millionaires in some years. He didn't do that, which may have been, lack of initiative or foresight. But my point is that I know the good life or the high life, and I've seen it, and it's fun sometimes to go to a nice place and have a nice meal. If you're addicted to that, you have a big problem, and you create a lot of problems for other people. And so I think that the call to conversion, God calling us to return to Him, is the most important thing we can do, and it involves everything. God is not unconcerned with our bank account or other areas of our life that we remove from His jurisdiction. God wants us to have life and have it in its fullness. Jesus says in the last discourses of His in John. The call to conversion is a call to be rational and to be philosophical, to love wisdom. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. All the philosophers, even Epicureans, I think, even hedonists probably, who sought pleasure, they understood rationally that in excess, it's counterproductive. If a glass of wine is great and two may be pretty good, there is a point when it's counterproductive, too much of a good thing. And so the whole realm of reason tells us how we should live. And in the Catholic tradition, especially in St. Thomas Aquinas, in whose order I was a member, and I am still at heart a Dominican, faith and reason, fides et ratio. I just heard a talk in my youth group about whether Mary had children, other children or not besides Jesus, and I wanted to say something about it. And if they give me a chance, and I don't know whether it's going to be appropriate or not to speak after someone else has spoken in the past. First thing I would say, it's a Catholic dogma that the Virgin Mary had only one child, and that's Jesus, called her firstborn, a technical term that does not imply that there's a second-born or a third-born. But it's a dogma of faith. You can't prove it. There are mentions of Jesus' brothers in the New Testament by name and sisters. And yes, in Hebrew, ach means brother, and it can refer to relative, etc. But in Greek, the language of the New Testament, there are words for cousins and relatives and things like that. Elizabeth, your kinswoman, etc. And those are not used. Paul says, James, the brother of the Lord, etc. The Protestants can't prove it, that she had other children, and the Catholics can't prove that she didn't. So that's where you have to have faith. And St. Thomas in his Angelingua hymn says, prestet fides supplementum quod essensum defectui. Let faith supplement what is lacking to the senses. But you have to have reason. And so I would say that as far as the ecology is concerned, the faith would tell us that we have to take care of the planet. And whatever words are used in Genesis to dominate the planet and subdue it, etc., you shall rule, etc., I would say that you would have to interpret that within the whole context and a biblical interpretation, but certainly keep in mind that a peaceful, basically vegetarian, non-violent world is what the scriptures aspire to. And the consequences of not doing that are horrible. I wanted to finish, because time flies when I start talking, with this text from Hosea that I'm sure many know, and I'm sure that I have spoken about before. But Hosea is a very interesting prophet. Hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel, because the Lord has a riv, he has a lawsuit against the inhabitants of the earth, because there is no emet, which is basically the word for truth. And there is no chesed, love, loving kindness. I call it this unique biblical idea of unusual acts of God, like the master of the vineyard that pays everyone the same, whether they were in the hot sun 1 hour or 8. Chesed is what Ruth does. Chesed is what Rahab does. Chesed is an emet. In fact, a faithfulness and unexpected love, or stability and unexpected love, is what we can expect of God. We can expect God to do the unexpected in love terms. And there is no da'at, no knowledge of Elohim upon the earth. No intimate relationship with God upon the earth. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, committing adultery. They break all bounds, and they shed blood, and blood touches blood. Non-stop bloodshed. Therefore, the land mourns. Avel, this is an able or able word. It mourns. Haaretz, the land mourns. And all who dwell in it languish. And also the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, and even the fish of the sea are taken away in this asaf verb to gather, which is applied to when you are gathered to your ancestors, meaning you died. So even the fish are dying. And then he goes into one of his great accusations against the priests. So in Hosea, I took a whole course on Hosea and Amos at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome with Professor Horacio Simeon Joffre, Jesuit, in 19, wow, I always forget things, 98, I guess, I was in Rome. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me. You have forgotten the law of your God, and I will also forget your children. The threshing floor will not feed them, and the new wine shall fail them. They shall not remain on the land. You have played the whore, Israel, etc. It's all there, folks. There's very little lacking if you read the Bible carefully. This requires this philosophical disposition of calmness. I went to Walmart the other morning, and I'm putting my things, and she's, the cashier this time is adding up my stuff, and this woman behind me typically sneaks in her thing. She can't wait, and then of course apologies. It's a whole lifestyle of rapidity and thoughtlessness in a hurry. Reminds me of a little story to finish. Elaine Stritch, one of my heroines, I guess. She goes to a party, and Frank Sinatra is there and asks her, "What do you do?" And she goes, "I'm in the theater." And Sinatra says, "No one gets anywhere in the theater." And Elaine Stritch, whose uncle was a cardinal, says to him, "And where do you think you're going, Mr. Sinatra?" In the sense that we're all in the same boat. And there is no, that's for birds, that's for the birds, or that's for losers, or this or that. We're all called to live in communion, especially in the body of Christ, but not just. And I just wanted to share this. I wanted to share the fact that without a prayerful searching for conversion as a daily, hourly, almost minute by minute thing, I have to gird myself all the time to stand firm and not relinquish my responsibility. I'm looking at this verse just to finish. They shall not remain in the land. Oh my God, I just did something weird here. They shall not remain on the land, but they will return to Egypt, to return to a place where God is not, a place of slavery, a place where they should never return, where they should never return. They are greedy for their iniquity. What else? What part don't we understand? Um, and so I did want to speak about how important it is to look at ecology as a holistic enterprise, which has to do with how we live. And certainly, it'll be the cross in many ways. It'll be a mortification, a putting to death desires that we have for material possessions and other things that are really the gangrene, the necrosis, the deadness that Paul speaks about in Second Corinthians. And so, in these days where we can see up close and personal what seem to be theories of scientists that presidents could redact and black out to please people so disposed to believe in fairy tales, hopefully, we are seeing now how drastic things have gotten, but whether the will be there and the leadership is, I like President Biden, but in general, if you have a party that has people that are totally out of it and whose leaders capitalize on that, uh, you know, um, I'm not optimistic. I am hopeful in the Christian sense. That's the hope of this cross, that there's a resurrection, that I can make a new heaven and a new earth. But we should start working on it, just like the kingdom of God is not something we sit back and wait like the Thessalonians. We have to agape, love is kopos, is a hard toil thing, says the first verses of Thessalonians. Hold on with hypomene, the hope, and then the work is faith. Ergon is pistis, faith, but love is hard work. And I think that's what we should be thinking about and striving for.